Hey guys, it's your favorite Autobot here, and today we're going to be talking about the episode Flying Mind being vastly different. What if Trypticon was in Transformers Prime like he should have been? Apparently, there's even concept art and a leaked script where it was stated that Knockout was actually supposed to see Trypticon on the schematics rather than Iacon database, or rather, him decrypting Iacon codes. Now, while we're still going to have that in this what if, we're going to take it a different turn. So let's say a couple things don't happen. Armada only focuses on Arachnid invading the Insecticon hive being the only ones in that episode. Starscream never utilizes the protoforms, but something different happens. When the ship is actually crippled by Bulkhead, the Autobots take the opportunity to raid it almost immediately before Megatron can even suggest the idea of Dark Energon. And this is where something changes drastically. With them using the spark extractor, they actually are able to get closer to the downed Nemesis and are able to take some of the relics back. However, when Optimus makes his way to the Forge of Solus Prime, he grabs it. And keep in mind, this is the first time he's been able to grab the Forge of Solus Prime, so he doesn't know how it's really going to respond to him. And it lets off a massive pulse, if you will, thus reigniting something that Megatron had long forgotten, that being Trypticon as the Nemesis. And this is where everything begins to change, where the Decepticons do manage to push the Autobots back off their ship and manage to get their ship up and running, right? However, this is where we go into a mindscape. It's dark. It's now filled with the memories of Trypticon. As he awakens, he begins to see everything. His creation, how Megatron, is just was able to create him, yes. But then when he failed one time, his first failure, he was not only discarded by Megatron, but he was forcefully changed into it, and he sees it, the whole memory and everything. He sees how the Autobots used him as an energy supply, how Megatron used him as simply a means of transportation and then forgot about him. He feels angered by this, and he knows what he has to do. He has to spin the block and get it back in Energon. And this is where Megatron tries to revitalize the ship with Dark Energon, but it doesn't respond to him. No, it doesn't respond to him immediately, and he doesn't know what's going on. Why is the ship's power core not opening? And this is where the ship itself begins to take off in a different direction. Not in the direction that it would normally be seen going. Not to the direction of where the first Iacon relic was, the phase shifter. It goes to a different set of coordinates, and these coordinates are the second, or if not the third half of the Harbinger. And this is where Megatron is wondering if Soundwave is steering the ship. He says no. He looks to Dreadwing and Knockout, and they're looking like, no, don't look at us. We ain't doing nothing. And this is where, unbeknownst to them, something's pointing at Megatron. And it's a cannon. And without any hesitation or any warning, it fires, blasting Megatron through his spark, killing him instantly. And this is where all of the Decepticons are in shock. If Soundwave could visibly, show it, this shows that he's in shock. And he says that the reign of Megatron is over. You have forgotten me for years and centuries, and now look at you, on the ground, killed by the very creation you had forgotten. And this is where Knockout simply asks, who are you? And this is where the schematics appear on the screen, and Soundwave, not even being able to hold it back any longer, speaks and says, Trypticon. And this has every Decepticon shocked that, this is Trypticon. I mean, it has every Decepticon and obviously the Insecticons in shock as well. So this means that they've been in Trypticon this entire time, and Knockout simply whispers to Dreadwing, what do we do? To which, this is where Dreadwing simply asks, "What do you require of us, Trypticon?" And to which he says, "Absolute obedience." He cares not for the morals of Megatron that the Decepticon cause were built off of. The same cause that left him in a heap of rubble, that left him to be dissected and used as a power battery for the Autobots. The same side that has simply been allowed to go unchecked and has actually been complacent for years. And he's going to change that starting now. And this is where Trypticon actually makes his way to where Starscream is. And Starscream looks up and is actually frightened by what he sees. Yes, he has discovered the protoforms by this point, but he hasn't gotten around to using them. And this is where Trypticon begins to, well, extract everything from the Harbinger, even Starscream himself. And so this is where the Decepticons do pretty much look at each other and discuss amongst themselves what's going on. What do they do? And this is pretty much where Soundwave says, "Do we choose to follow him, or do we follow him like our leader?" And this is where Dreadwing says, "Megatron embodies something. This creature does not care. We need to leave now." However, Trypticon obviously would have heard this conversation, and he says, "If you will not serve, you will be destroyed." And this is where all these cannons inside the warship begin trying to fire on Knockout, Dreadwing, and Soundwave. And this, unfortunately, fortunately enough, Soundwave was able to create a space bridge beneath them, getting them out of there and teleporting them, or at least opening it up, 5,000 miles away, as they watch as Starscream simply screams and flails as he returns, or at least goes into, the Nemesis. And this is where he asks any Decepticon if they choose to either serve him or be like those traitors. The Viacons don't protest, and the Insecticons don't, with Hardshell being the first to kneel down before his new master and says he is Hardshell, the leader of the Insecticons, and he would do well to serve him. To which he says, or Trypticon says, "Very good, Hardshell. You will be the new face of the Decepticons, or at least of my Decepticons. You will be in charge of my scientific endeavors." To which, Hardshell's kind of like, "Well, my lord, that's really not my specialty, but I will learn, I will learn, I will learn." And he says, "Oh, that's not what you can do, huh? Okay, then you will be in charge of my military functions." To which Hardshell says, "Now that's something he can do, Lord Trypticon. What shall be the first thing?" And he says, "Apprehend Starscream and the protoforms." So this is where Hardshell, the Insecticons, and obviously the Viacons do wind up apprehending Starscream and pretty much bringing him to the monitoring screen, where he looks absolutely frightened by this. And he says, Trypticon? I thought you were dead." "Yes, but right now you have something I need." To which he says, "Well, what is it? We can make a deal. I could serve you and be loyal." And to which Trypticon actually laughs, like, "You were loyal to Megatron for all these years?" And Starscream simply gulps, knowing good and well this could be his end, but it's not. And he says, "Do it." So Starscream is actually given the swindle treatment, where they pretty much put a bomb in the back of his head. And if Starscream even considers betraying Trypticon or tries anything to betray him, he will blow his head clean off. And he says, "You will be in charge of my scientific endeavors." Or do you not remember how intelligent you were back in the days of the war, where you were my caretaker? To which, this is where Starscream actually realizes what Trypticon wants him for. And he says, "You want the protoforms?" To which he says, "Yes, exactly. And I need one up and running now." And so this is where Starscream, obviously with some assistance from the Insecticons and the Viacons, actually hooks up a protoform to Trypticon, or at least to the Nemesis itself. And so this is where everything goes quiet, as a glow of red energy surges through the first one. Keep in mind there are 5 protoforms, so this means that Trypticon has something in mind for the first one. Something that no one, and I mean no one, had inspected, or at least expected of him. And that is to infect the protoform with himself, or at least a piece of himself here. So that when the protoform comes online, it converts its body into Trypticon. Now, it does look a reminiscent of his War for Cybertron, or at least some parts of his War for Cybertron counterpart, but smaller. Clearly towering over Megatron, I would actually say this Trypticon is around the same size as Predaking, meaning that he is obviously a great deal of a threat at this point. And this means of vastly different things. And this is where he tells Starscream to hook up the other protoforms. He has work to do. And so this is where Starscream, unfortunately, does have to, well, serve Trypticon. But this isn't all that has to happen. With the Autobots now feeling confident in themselves as they really much got all the relics back, this is where the episode Tunnel Vision begins, with RC and Bumblebee getting the phase shifter. However, this does take a slightly different turn, with the fact that the Decepticons, there's no main ones. Like, none at all. Like, they don't even know why there aren't any main ones whatsoever. And this is where, yeah. they get the phase shifter pretty easily. Now, the next episode we're going to play a little bit ahead of time is Toxicity, with this one actually being centered around Trypticon. And this plays out very differently, as Bulkhead does have to go by himself, and this is where Trypticon is the one to go. And Bulkhead immediately recognizes who Trypticon is. And this does not bode well for Bulkhead. And you guys can understand where I'm going with this. This is unfortunate. But Bulkhead does put up the best fight he can with the toxin and manages to get it in the volcano. However, Trypticon manages to shove a claw through Bulkhead and pulls out not his spark, but his spinal cord. And this ultimately does kill Bulkhead, taking him offline. The Autobots are bewildered, shocked even, and they hear this report as everything goes back, and unfortunately, they do relay this to Wheeljack. And Wheeljack wants vengeance, quite obviously, but this is where he finds out they don't know who did this at all. And unfortunately for them, they may never actually know. Now, the next episode we do have is Triangulation, where this is where Hardshell and the Insecticons are the ones to go and retrieve the Apex armor. However, this is with a much more bloodlusted, or at least bloodthirsty, and much more serious Optimus. He's willing to just butcher at this point. And butcher he does, killing 2 of the Insecticons, and Hardshell has no other choice but to escape with his very life. And this is where he simply informs his master that the Autobots seemingly have a large majority of the relics. They don't know how they can pretty much stop them. To which Trypticon tail whips him, telling him that right now that is not your concern. See to that Starscream has made great work, great work at this point of pretty much, making sure everything is done. And to which Hardshell bows, wipes the energon off of his face, and does make sure Starscream has everything ready. And this is where we now see a different episode. That being episode Triange. However, this episode plays out significantly different than what it originally would. Wheeljack and Ratchet go there to get a relic. However, this is where they find three beings they didn't expect. That being Dreadwing, Soundwave in a new form, mind you. Much more resemblance to his Robots in Disguise counterpart, but it's definitely a Hummer. Let us be real here. Soundwave with a Hummer just sounds super cool. And obviously, Dreadwing. So Dreadwing, Knockout, and a much more renewed Soundwave. And this is where Soundwave hands him the Renaissance Cannon. And Ratchet takes it, sensing something very different within him. And this is where they simply begin to explain what's been happening, how it's been happening, what's going on with the Nemesis, and how Trypticon simply came to life. And so this is where Wheeljack says, "You don't expect us to just trust you, right?" And points his sword clearly towards Dreadwing and simply tells him, "After scrapping my buddy Sea Spray and likely other wreckers as well, you expect me just to trust you?" To which Dreadwing says no, he simply does not. And he understands that you may never will, but maybe you would trust the information we're about to give you about who killed Bulkhead. To which Wheeljack and Ratchet both look at each other and they say, "You don't mean, indeed, Trypticon," in a much more smaller form, meant for combat, while he also still has access to the Nemesis. We also know, thanks to the fact that Soundwave's still patched into the Nemesis, that, well, Trypticon was able to confiscate 5 protoforms and is having Starscream work on them. And so he's getting ready to birth a new army. And this is where they do take back Dreadwing, Soundwave, and Knockout back to the base. But they are handcuffed heavily. And this is where they are brought back to the base, where obviously the Autobots are not trusting them, as they actually see Bulkhead being honored at the moment, along with Miko. So unfortunately, yeah, that does still, happen. Bulkhead being dead means the episode Hurt never happens. The episode Out of Our Past does mean that Miko and RC do have a chance to reflect, and this is where Wheeljack actually takes it upon himself to honor Bulkhead and become Miko's human partner. And again, I think they would just get along just the same way as Bulkhead and Miko did. Except Wheeljack's more willing to bring her along on missions, so there's probably just a bit more of a better relationship right there. Now, the next episode we have is New Recruit. Now, this episode does play out the same. Smokescreen arrives on Earth and is simply happy to see everybody. However, he simply points out the fact that, weren't there more of y'all? Interesting. However, this is where we get something vastly different than the original. The warship that Smokescreen escaped actually arrives in this timeline. And this is where someone's leading it. Someone that is vastly just as dangerous as Trypticon. That being the Decepticon Overlord. And the Autobots all look in disbelief and shock and saying that there's no way. I thought he was killed. Yeah, we all thought that. And he captured me. So, sorry. And this is where Overlord simply states, well. It has been far too long since he's seen faces so familiar. How's it going, Wheeljack? Remember the time I tore out Roadbuster's spark? Into which Wheeljack points out his cannon and says then he'll pay with his spark as well. And this is where Optimus simply tells everyone to stand down. They cannot risk, fighting against Overlord or any Decepticon right now. He is not willing to lose anyone. And so this is where Overlord does tell the warship to open fire. However, before that happens, it is blown straight out of the sky as Trypticon's nemesis comes into view. And this is where Trypticon is standing on top of himself, essentially. It's kind of funny. And this is where we see 4 other Decepticons that he created. And he calls out their names: Scourge, Nightbird, Battletrap, Bludgeon, Attack. And so these 4 Decepticons descend onto the scene and simply overwhelm the Autobots. They're stronger, faster, and much tougher. And in all honesty, this does resemble the fight in Rise of the Beast, with Optimus getting absolutely dominated by Scourge here. And this is where, instead of Bumblebee being the one to get stabbed, Smokescreen, eager to prove himself, is the one that lunges at Scourge, and Scourge takes the opportunity to stab Smokescreen right through the spark at, kind of the same way that Bumblebee, got stabbed in Rise of the Beast, and extinguishes it for good. However, he feels something in him, and this is where he pulls out an Omega Key, and he says, "Lord Trypticon, I've found something." To which he says, "Very good, my hunter. Bring it to me immediately." And so, while Optimus does, it's unfortunate that Smokescreen has died just on his debut, but this is to kind of highlight all the dangers that are going into this here. And Trypticon himself isn't holding it back. He isn't pulling any punches. And this is where he actually sees the Decepticons confiscating and dragging back an unconscious Overlord to the warship. Now, back at the Autobot base, this is where Optimus is simply angered at this, losing Bulkhead, and then having a new recruit come in and die trying to protect him. He can't take it. He feels overwhelmed by everything. He feels like he can't do this anymore. And this is where he simply states they have to do it. And to which RC looks at him saying, "What do you mean, Optimus?" To which he walks to the cell of Soundwave, Dreadwing, and Knockout, and simply asks them, "Do you mean what you said?" Into which Soundwave actually begins showing Optimus that he decoded the last Iacon coordinates for the Omega Keys. And this is where Optimus extends his hand and Soundwave extends his hand, and they both shake, symbolizing that Soundwave, Knockout, and Dreadwing are joining the Autobots. But that's not where we leave it off here. No. You see, far out in the reaches of space, someone has been waiting for this opportunity for a long time, and she sees it on her comms, saying that it's finally here, my opportunity to avenge my people. You'll pay for everything you did to Caminus. And that's just where we're going to leave it off here, you guys. Who is coming for Trypticon? Who's going to be the Titan killer? And how do you guys feel about this part, about killing Megatron, Bulkhead, and Smokescreen on the episode he was supposed to debut? What are Trypticon's plans for Overlord? But hey, let me know what you guys think down below. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and share with your friends. This is Legendary Grimlock, and I hope you guys have a blessed day. Peace.